Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends, colleagues, and partners from all over the world. My name is Faith Abiodun, and I serve as Executive Director at the United World Colleges International. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us for today's UWC Climate Education Forum. We are absolutely thrilled to have you joining us in this conversation about the important role of education in fast-tracking youth leadership in the race to achieve net zero. We have a panel of very exciting speakers today, but I am not one of them. So I will make some very quick housekeeping announcements and pave the way for us to listen to our panel of experts so we can maximize the time with them. Firstly, we warmly encourage you to kindly keep your cameras on for as long as you can, if you can. And secondly, so that we know exactly where you are from all across the world, we invite you to change your Zoom name, your location, if you can, the organization which you represent, to the extent that you can make some of those adjustments. And thirdly, we have many different people joining us today from different walks of life, the academia, education, governments, nonprofits, etc. So we'd like to encourage you to kindly use the chat as much as you can to respond and build a conversation in many ways over the course of the day. This event will last for approximately an hour, and so we want to maximize as much time as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Her Excellency Shauna Aminath, who is the Maldives Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Technology. Very importantly for us, Shauna is an alumna of Pearson College UWC in Canada. Shauna has dedicated her career to youth-led initiatives to address climate change, and she has championed pioneering emissions reduction goals in the Maldives. Shauna, it is a great pleasure to have you today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Faith, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am here to moderate this wonderful panel on climate education. And as you mentioned, I'm also a UWC alum, which is why this is so special for me, both to speak on climate and to be here on a panel to really be able to explain how special the UWC education has been. My UWC experience is, to put it simply, one of the most transformative years of my life, and had a huge impact on my worldview, my values, and what matters to me most. But before we start our discussion on education and how important UWC education is on how we can be able to resolve the climate crisis that we face, let me also take this opportunity to introduce the panelists that we have here. Some of them are UWC alums, some work very closely with the UWC movement, and we also have a climate champion with us today who will be able to explain to us the importance of this issue. So we have with us Barrise Griffin. She's an expert in disaster risk management and development in the Caribbean and small island developing states at large. Her work focuses on critically examining the social perceptions of risks and crafting policies to create more effective strategies in disaster preparedness and response. Barrise attended the UWC in Costa Rica and was selected from the Bahamas. Welcome, Barrise. Let me also introduce you, Bill McKibben, a climate champion who I met many years ago in the Maldives, with our efforts to highlight how important it was to keep global emissions at 350 parts per million. Bill is a contributing writer to The New Yorker and founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 to work on climate and racial justice. He founded the first global grassroots climate campaign, 350.org, which is where we met, and serves as the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College in Vermont. It's an honor to have you here, Bill. We also have Camila Fernández Nion. She's an environmental geographer who works as an assistant professor at Universidad de la República Uruguay and there's a scientific researcher for the National Agency of Research and Innovation in Uruguay. Her research focuses on applying geospatial information technology and remote sensing strategies to analyze land cover and land use change. Camila attended the UWC Southeast Asia and was selected from Uruguay. The final speaker and the panelist that we have with us is Marija Uzunova Dang, and she is a learning designer and international educator with experience across India, Europe, and North America. Marija recently led the design and development of the Pearson College UWC's Climate Action Leadership Diploma. I recently met with the students who are studying this diploma as well. It's such an honor to have you here. She's currently working on the launch of a new pathway within the International Baccalaureate Diploma at UWC Atlantic, focusing on just futures in food, energy, biodiversity, and migration. So just to put it lightly, UWC education is very special. And it's also such an interesting time for us to have students who are in this age together from all over the world to understand the importance that matters, the important issues that matters to the world in general as well. So just very quickly, before we jump into our larger discussion, I would like to ask a 1-minute question for each panelist, which is, what do you think is the role of secondary education in the fight against climate change? You have 1 minute, and then we will move to Bill's special address. So if I may request Marija to start the discussion. Your 1 minute starts now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shauna, and an honor to be in the company of friends and co-conspirators this afternoon. Maybe I'll speak about the dual role that I see for secondary education in this. And the first one has got to be that we are honest to our young people about the depth of the trouble that we're in, about the scale of the challenge in front of us, and about the root causes of the problem. The second role that I see is that as we equip people for the fight of resisting and organizing against averting all of these future scenarios that we wish to avoid, that at the same time we equip young people with the tools to actually build the world that we want to live in. And so it's a big job, and I'm glad we have some full power people with whom to think about this today. And also I'm really glad that we have a whole movement behind us of 60 generations of full power UWC alumni as well. I think I have time to spare.
Thank you, Marija. Barrise, what is the role of secondary education in the fight against climate change?
So secondary education plays a critical role in helping children to prepare for their futures. So with the state of our future being directly and heavily impacted by climate change, secondary education with a focus on climate change is the first step in fostering generations with knowledge, skills, and values needed to address the climate crisis and act as agents of change. So this will empower them to look beyond misinformation and make informed decisions in a changing environment.
And now finally, Camila, what's your response to this question?
Well, hello, everyone. So secondary school students are at a key moment in their formation as active citizens, right? But they are already citizens, and in many cases, very active citizens. So I believe that the central role of this educational stage is to transmit critical thinking as a tool for all aspects of life. And in fact, the debates in science and society have led us today to recognize climate change as a problem for humanity. And that was not something just given. Recognizing climate change as a problem is the result of critical thinking that has been spread throughout the world and of a lot of scientific and political debate over the years. So I think that's a key thing, critical thinking as a tool, and also to become aware of the capacity to actively generate changes in society, not only as individuals, but also collectively, to become aware of the active power of organized society in different forms of activism that it could take. So that, I think those are the two main roles of secondary education on this.
Great. Thank you so much for responding to this important question that will really shape the discussions that we're going to have this evening or this afternoon, wherever you are. But I don't want to wait any longer because, Bill, you're here with us. You're a climate champion. You have advocated for urgent action, not yesterday, but now. We absolutely need to be able to address this issue because this is the last generation that will be able to address the crisis that we face today. So I'm not going to keep everyone waiting longer, but Bill, please enlighten us on what you think, how we can respond to this crisis that we face today.
Well, Shauna, thank you. What a pleasure to get to see you, friend, and to get to see new friends here and to get to see Faith and everybody at UWC. This is a real pleasure for me. I've had the honor over the years of getting to speak at many UWC campuses and then to watch my own daughter go through UWC Nordic. And so I know as well as anyone just what a transformative experience it is. And I think in this context, talking about climate change, it's an absolutely essential institution. Look, we face the first truly global problem we've ever faced as a species. And so the first truly global educational system we have on the planet is going to have to play some serious role in dealing with this. And UWC is well equipped to do it, not just for all the smart reasons that everybody's already outlined about why secondary education is important, but for one more thing too. My experience at those UWC campuses is that in place after place after place, young people are exposed to the outdoors and the natural world in really profound ways that they might not have gotten in a world where we tend to stick young people behind screens all the time. And I think that is incredibly important as well. Let me provide in my 10 minutes just the littlest bit of background for where we are. I wrote the first book about what we now call climate change, what we then called the greenhouse effect, back in 1989 when I was in my 20s. And the tragedy is we don't really know anything now that we didn't know then. We were well warned by science as to what was coming. But instead of doing anything about it, we let the rich and powerful in this world, especially the fossil fuel industry, divert us, distract us, and deceive us for 3 decades. And as a result, we now have to move extraordinarily fast, not to stop global warming. It is too late for that, but maybe to stop it short of the place where it cuts our civilizations off at the knees. That's not going to be easy, even under the best of circumstances. We've now raised the temperature of the Earth more than 1 degree Celsius, and we're seeing dramatic effects already. Those effects are going to accelerate over the next, and here I want to be very clear, over the next 18 months or 2 years is going to be a very critical period in Earth history. We're entering a strong El Nino phase in the Pacific. That's going to drive the temperature of the planet up much higher than it already is. It's pretty clear that we're going to set a new global temperature record this year and then again the next. And we're pretty likely to, at least for a year or two, go past the 1.5 degree Celsius rise in temperature that the world set as its black line in Paris just 8 years ago. In other words, we're going to see things that no human being has ever seen before because the planet's going to be hotter than it's ever been in human history. We don't know exactly what that will produce, but we can be confident that it will produce chaos and havoc and trauma and pain. And we get signals of that, every day. We're coming through a truly horrendous heat wave in Mexico and parts of Central America. In Canada, the forests are burning at a rate that we've never seen before, and the smoke drifting down across the continent. In Europe, Northern Europe, and into the Arctic, we're seeing temperatures that we've never seen before, and the rapid melt of glaciers. There's a big paper out today about what's happening in the highlands of Asia, where the enormous water tower of the Himalayas is melting and more quickly than we had even expected. People like Shauna are well aware of what's happening as the oceans now begin to accelerate their rise. That's the very bad news. The better news is we have a stronger sense than we used to of what we could do about this and what's possible. Scientists and engineers have done their job remarkably well, driving the price of renewable energy down about 90% in the last decade. We're now fortunate to live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is a remarkable change. It allows people in this generation to imagine that humans could put behind them the 700,000-year-old habit of setting things on fire. We don't need to burn coal or gas or oil or biomass anymore. And that's a great gift, not only because we might be able to arrest climate change, but because 9 million people a year on this planet die, 1 death in 5, from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. All those particulates that get in your lungs. If you've been to Delhi or Shanghai in recent years, you have some sense of this, but it happens everywhere. There are hundreds of thousands of cases of childhood asthma in my country every year. We have an extraordinary problem. We have an extraordinary solution. Our job is to catalyze the reaction to make that solution happen in time to matter. Because climate change, and this is the most important thing that I can say, is a timed test, perhaps the first timed test that we've really ever faced. It's not like other political issues where we argue back and forth decade after decade and make some incremental progress. If we don't win here soon, then we will not win. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has told us we need to cut emissions in half in the next 6 years to start meeting the targets we met in Paris. That is very hard work to do, but we have the possibility of doing it if we push the system. And here's where I really want to end by saying that building those movements is to push those systems, to demand economic and political change in rapid fashion is the most important task of all, I think. And it's a place where young people are absolutely in the lead. I formed 350.org with 7 college students at Middlebury, which is one of the original host schools of UWC. We went on to found this fossil fuel divestment campaign that's now captured university after university around the world. We're at $40 trillion in endowments and portfolios that have divested from fossil fuel. Young people founded the Sunrise Movement in North America that brought us the Green New Deal. Around the world, young people of high school and junior high school age have done unbelievable work. Everybody knows Greta Thunberg, and they should. She's one of my favorite people to work with in the world, and it was great fun to be talking with her last week when she finally graduated from high school. But Greta would be the first to say there are 10,000 Gretas scattered around the planet. I've known people in every continent, young people who are doing incredible work. Vanessa Nakate, Alexandria Villasenor, Louisa Neubauer, on and on and on. Incredible friends and incredible activists. Young people are very much in the lead. Let me finish by saying that young people cannot be alone in this work. it is not fair to say this is up to the next generation, both because they didn't solve this problem and because alone they lack the structural power to solve it by themselves. One group that has a lot of structural power is old people like me. That's why we're organizing this group Third Act beginning in North America. We've got many tens of thousands of volunteers hard at work. You can see the rocking chair behind me against the wall. The rocking chair is kind of our symbol. We just finished a series of 100 big sit-ins across America, shutting down for a day the big banks that fund the fossil fuel industry: Citibank, Chase Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. And we did it because we're old. All our sit-ins we did in rocking chairs, and it worked very well. The reason to say this is to let young people know, and I think this is awfully important, that the climate anxiety that now is very intense among young people is real, should be respected, understood as a symptom of the crisis that we're going through. It is an honest reflection of the difficulty that we are in, and it is something that all of us can help deal with by demonstrating our own willingness to get behind young people as they move forward. That's why it's so important for me, such a pleasure for me to be here today and see the incredibly powerful work that people are doing as they come out of UWC. And I know that even while they're in school, people are managing to figure out really potent and important ways to have an impact on the single greatest challenge that our species has ever faced. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. You surely don't mince your words, and what you have really described is what is happening to the world. As someone who's speaking from the Maldives, as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, we are already witnessing the impacts of climate change with 1.1 degrees of warming alone. I cannot imagine a home at 1.5, or even if it overshoots 1.5. Just before, I just wanted to give an opportunity for our speakers here, if you would like to respond to some of the comments Bill made. I think maybe Barrise, you might be able to respond to how prepared do you think are the small island states in terms of preparation for adaptation and disaster risk reduction and loss and damage. And I also want to put a question to Camila as well. What do you think are the technologies that are emerging in how we are able to reduce emissions and how we may be able to prevent overshooting of 1.5, because it's absolutely critical for the survival of the planet and the humanity as well to limit to 1.5. So if you want to jump in, please jump in, Maria, as well. No more than 1 minute.
Thank you, Shauna. So in regards to island states, I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but I'm happy that some progress is being made, or at least conversations and collaborations interregionally or throughout the small island developing state networks are being made. And to Bill's point, I would like to say that it is important for youth involvement in these decisions. So I think it's important that within our small island network, we begin creating mechanisms and frameworks that integrate youth, as well as keeping the knowledge of the older generation. So creating more collaboration across generations in the fight against climate change.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead, Camila, yeah.
So I think related to technologies and reducing emissions, so energetic transitions are a key issue for the entire world, obviously, and that's already on the global agenda. So transition from fossil fuels to sustainable sources of energy, I think, is a key issue, especially wind and solar, as Bill already mentioned. Proudly, Uruguay has 46% of its energetic supply on wind energy. But also, I think we do need to think on how are we making that transition, because it shouldn't make inequality deeper. For example, taking minerals from the global south in ways that are not contributing to sustainable development in a social and economic way. So I think we should aim to that, but taking what we have learned from what we haven't done well from our previous experiences related to how we manage social justice, I would say.
Shauna, I'll also just quickly jump in here, Bill, mostly to say thank you for lifting up what young people are already capable of at 16, 17, and 18, and just kind of highlighting the power of intergenerational movement building. That is really something that it really becomes an organizing principle for the UWC movement as well. Young people come in as students, but they're alumni for life. And so what are the ways that we can continue to mobilize for shared goals? And you spoke also about the special role that outdoor education plays in the UWC educational model. The other thing that I wanted to just highlight, because it just feels so fundamental to the UWC education, is that any teenager around the world with a laptop can explore climate issues. But what's different about UWCs is that these are not intellectual issues. You meet people who are deeply affected by these issues, and there's a very unique empathetic relationship that becomes just so fundamental to how young people choose to act for the rest of their life. The alumni on this call will remember how this is not an intellectual exercise, it's a deeply human exercise, and that is a very rich starting point from which to work.
Absolutely. I think all the speakers, you've really managed to summarize this complex issue of ranging from the impacts of climate change to the technology that is needed for it, and also the intergenerational dialogue that absolutely needs to happen for us to be able to resolve this crisis. We cannot do this alone, and we have to do it together with everyone, with all age groups, with all political partners as well. Before getting into the technical details, I want to refocus us on the role of education on this. So my next question that I would like to ask is, the urgency is so clear. Bill has rightly described how scary it would be by 2030, and it's just in 79 months. When we think about it, such a short span of time that we have. Before 2030, we need to reduce our emissions by 43%. And we have to be able to reach this target to prevent a triple planetary crisis as well. So my question is, what needs to change within education for us to be able to do this together? Will such changes make a real difference in practice and in time as well? And what needs to happen for us to be able to reach this target? So I think, Maria, you are in the best position for us to kickstart this conversation. Please, we're really interested to hear your views on this.
Thank you, Shauna. Let me try. Combining the combined challenge of urgency and complexity is tremendous. And so I want to start kind of from how this manifests at the very basic level of understanding. And perhaps the main way that we under-equip young people is by teaching them fragmented disciplinary knowledge and leaving them to do the hard work of making sense and piecing the world together from kind of decontextualized bits of standard level global politics and higher level chemistry. And there is no reason and no good excuse any longer to be teaching young people about complex global issues this way. Because to understand the climate, let alone the climate crisis, these things that sometimes we call hyper objects, for those of you who are familiar with that work, we really need to mobilize the full spectrum of the human experience, of human ingenuity, of human knowledge across and beyond disciplines within and outside of schools and intergenerationally, like Bill was saying. And I emphasize this because I feel like sometimes climate education that is at risk of being reduced to climate science education. And science is important, but science as a knowledge system, kind of underpinning modernity and coloniality, is not just implicated, but also complicit in how we got into this mess in the first place. So it will not single-handedly get us out of trouble. But as a critical anthropologist of science, I will responsibly say science is critically important. And thankfully, its lesson is remarkably clear and has been since Bill was 20 years old. And in the words of his fellow climate scientist, Kimberly Nicholas, it goes something like this. It's warming, it's us, we're sure, it's bad, and we can fix it. And for the fixing part, I don't think she suggests that we can smart our way out of the crisis. The depth of our trouble is about so much more than just a simple knowledge deficit. And I think this is what makes the role of education complex, but also interesting, because more deeply, this is about a deficit of compassion, which is much harder to fix. It's a series of deep kind of coordination failures. It is a failure of political will to collaborate in unprecedented ways. And it's clear that we're also dealing with the challenge that you presented us with in the context of multiple overlapping crises, economic, political, ecological, cultural, spiritual. They have a collective name even. We call it the meta crisis or the poly crisis. And there's a real danger, I think, in conversations like these sometimes that we reduce the meta crisis to climate, and sometimes even go a step further and reduce the climate conversation to carbon and debates about emissions and greenhouse gases. And I think unless we widen the conversation and organize more broadly, this is where we lose people, because even a post-carbon world is not necessarily a just world or an equitable world. And how we get to the net zeros that we have set ourselves as targets, this issue of just transition is everything. Anyone who's tried to say this in climate spaces and UWC spaces that are typically highly contested and very emotionally charged, sometimes you get accused of trying to fight all your battles on the front lines of climate, which is hard enough, or of distracting or detracting from the agenda, or accused of this thing called whataboutism. But also at the same time, I think insisting that we deal with climate on its own erases the way that the climate emergency is not in any way some sort of anomaly or a symptom of the system not working. It's actually almost the perfectly predictable outcome of centuries of colonialism and its current legacy in the global extractivist economy and the kind of unequal and unsustainable lifeways that it supports. And so if we were to design a climate education that is globally relevant, or at the very least teach climate in a diverse classroom like we do at UWC, we're going to have to accept that we need to navigate this dialogue in a way that grapples with power, with the inequities and injustices that are baked into our current systems, and be prepared to radically reimagine many of our institutions. And if you're hearing this against the backdrop of 2030, 2050 goals and targets and say we don't have time for this, we have to avert all of these disaster scenarios, I think the thing we need to reckon with is that probably isn't a scenario in which we avert the climate crisis in its entirety. Sure, let's avert the worst of it, like Bill was saying, but we are fundamentally living on a climate change planet, and that is the one that our students are inheriting. And so when we talk about the challenge of a UWC education, it needs to answer to that question of how do we educate for thriving and living on a fundamentally climate change planet. And we educate like crises are interconnected, because they are, and we educate like the way out of the trouble is going to take collaboration at an unprecedented level, because it will. And we educate like life is worth defending and affirming, because it is. And this really isn't radical in any sense, except maybe the Latin origin of the word radical, which means tackling issues at the root cause level. We have two examples already within the UWC movement of what this looks like in practice. And somehow, miraculously, I was lucky enough to be involved with both the Climate Action Leadership Diploma, which looks at real skills and competencies for climate action, mitigation, and adaptation in the context of indigenous resurgence in Salmon Nation on Turtle Island, or at Atlantic College, when starting in August, we've redesigned our academic program so that young people learn to transform whole systems and advance just futures in food, energy, biodiversity, and migration, and have a IB partnership that promises to scale this to 5,700 schools by 2030 and hundreds of thousands of young people. And this is the last thing I'll say, is what it takes to be at the forefront of progressive international education today. And that in this anniversary year, our 60th year of our movement, our work is to once more in that pioneering spirit that started the UWC movement, that co-founded International Baccalaureate and defined what global education looks like, to push the frontier of mission-driven education, in our case for just and equitable and net zero futures by 2050. And I'll pause there and pass it back over to you, Shauna.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. I think you really have captured some of the complex issues that we're trying to tackle here. Now, if I may request Barrise, and then followed by Camila, your response to what really needs to change within education for us to be able to reflect on the urgency of reaching our net zero target, and what can we do to make this happen?
Thank you, Shauna. And well said, Maria. I thought your points on moving towards international or progressive international education with our UW experience, especially having diverse backgrounds in one classroom, bringing their context to the classroom and what that would mean for climate change, was a really solid point. So from my perspective, we all know education plays a critical role in how we address climate change, and it encourages people to make informed decisions. And we can regard this as the first step. So knowing and learning about what climate change is and what it means and how it impacts your communities is only the first step. The next step is investing in skills and training and new courses that can strengthen capacities within our communities and countries, especially communities and countries disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change, and giving them the sustainable skills necessary to support themselves and adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. So with this knowledge, we must now develop the skills and abilities needed to meet emission regulations or manage waste or adopt and sustain renewable and sustained energy, as well as produce green and resilient solutions. Education is not just the theoretical knowledge, but also the practical, learning how to put into use the things that we learned in our education and in our classrooms. So these things will make a difference as we increase the efforts to educate our communities on climate change, especially these communities like small island developing states. And I believe another major step is having more commitment and investment and support from governments around the world to increase capacity building across disproportionately affected countries and communities. So it would be by providing funding and training interest to youth and youth networks. Back to you, Shauna.
Thank you, Barrise. Next, Camila, what are your thoughts on the discussions that we're having?
Well, trying not to overlap with what you have already said, which I agree in general. I want to, first of all, link it to what I said previously, that a central challenge is to quickly change the mentality of institutions, educators, and students also, that young people are the future, because young people in secondary education are not only the future, but they are also the present. So they have to be part of the solutions that we have to generate today, not as passive participants or only as listeners, but as highly active participants. And I think we have to be self-critical as a global community about the measures that we have been implementing decades ago and successively failed to effectively tackle climate change. Aligned to what Bill mentioned about the climate change diagnosis that we have years ago, and we still, we are recently making it, dimensioning how big of a problem we have. So I think that's part of what we need to teach early on the citizens of today and the future, to analyze those previous experiences of the global community and to be critical about them, not complacent. That should be part of what we study in secondary education, considering environmental, social, and economic aspects. And also, and I think this is the main thing I want to highlight about this, is something that has to change in how we approach the way we think about environmental issues. And it should be part of the goals on education in today's world. That is to understand that cooperation is stronger than competition, especially when it comes to things that affect all of us. And I think that's something we often lose sight of from an economic center mentality, because from an economic point of view, that is the main paradigm: competition and individualism as a way to manage resources efficiently. But climate change challenges that mentality because the destruction of ecosystems and atmospheric pollution and the temperature rise, those are problems that know no borders between countries or between social groups. But we also have to acknowledge that the living conditions of many people in the world and multiple humanitarian crises that we see every day, climate change will have greater impact on those who are already more vulnerable. And we need to bear that in mind and find solutions considering that aspect of the issue, which I think sometimes is the most critical in terms of finding a balance between different opinions, because I think we do agree we have to reduce emissions, and that's something that not a lot of people argues anymore, at least in where I work or where I do my activism. But I think this other part, the social part, is something that we are still having a lot of discussion on. And I know as an alumnus that UWC does a number of these things I'm going to mention as examples, but including critical analysis, starting with current issues linked to the climate crisis. And from there, disaggregating the whys. Why did this happen? What could have been done better? I think that's something we should really do on this educational stage. Also having collaborative activities, outdoor activities, encouraging active participation from students in institutional matters. Those are some ways I think we can actively empower their role as young people on this issue. So Shauna, back to you.
Thank you, Camila. And as I was listening to you, I think one of the things that really I wanted to ask more on is, how can we create the compassion and empathy around the world? And how could we use the UWC movement and the education that most of us here have received? How could we use that as a force to be able to create a movement that could jumpstart action that we need to find a solution as well? So especially in a world where we're all connected. Look, I'm in the Maldives and Barrise, you're in Sri Lanka, and most of us are in different parts of the world. We are connected. How could we use this as a tool to create a movement that could help to get us the results before 2030? I'm just, this is a question I always think about this, but I'm always curious in a UWC environment, how could to ask these questions as well. Please jump in.
Well,
any of the panelists.
Shauna, I'll just say for a minute, just to build on things that people have been saying, which I think are very, very smart. And I'd go one step further and say, at this point, in educational terms, the science is the least important part of all of this. The science is completely clear. You can cover it in, one hour classroom. Burn coal and gas and oil, you put stuff in the air that heats up the planet, and now we're in big trouble. In fact, climate change is something of a gift for educators in the sense that it forces a kind of interdisciplinary thinking that we've lazily avoided in the past. There's no way to avoid it because all the solutions require some interplay of political science and economics and theology and psychology and sociology. But none of them working by themselves can do what needs doing. It has to be some way to integrate all of these things into a whole. And it has to be done, as Barrise and Camila have really said powerfully, in a framework that somehow connects to justice, because climate change isn't just the most dangerous thing we've ever done, it's the most unfair thing we've ever done. And it's worth remembering that all the time. I mean, Africa has produced, as an entire continent, something like 3% of the emissions that drive climate change. And yet Africa is suffering more of the consequences than any other continent. Pakistan just lived through a flood like we haven't seen since Noah. 33 million people displaced, but Pakistan's produced way less than 1% of all the carbon in the air. So these are the kind of, it's not like other educational challenges that we've dealt with in the past, because we've never dealt with anything quite like this in the past. And that really is a call to shake up how we study things. I'll just end by saying, for 100 years, we basically looked at the world, the realistic people looked at the world as the main problem was, how can we make economies grow larger? And so whatever was going to make economies grow larger, we did, Now we have to look at the world through a new lens about what's going to allow us to survive as a planet. And that is a very different lens, but a fascinating one. Intellectually, we're entering a period of extraordinary interest and power that's going to call on absolutely everything, including our resources as poets, artists, writers, musicians, as well as scientists and political scientists and all those other things. It's a remarkable moment. It could be a tragic moment, and it also could be a quite heroic moment for our species.
Bill, I think you've really laid it out well. The science is so clear on this, and this is not an issue of not understanding what's happening to the world. And what I usually say when it comes to how we should be able to resolve the crisis is, look how we responded to the COVID-19 crisis. And we managed to produce vaccines just under 6 months. We managed to raise not millions, but trillions of dollars to address the health crisis, because we treated it as a public health emergency. If the climate crisis is treated like an emergency as it is, countries, the more developed countries, should be able to raise the finance that is needed for the developing countries to have a just transition as well. And the climate crisis is one issue that is so clear that we cannot divide the world to global north and global south, because we are in this all together. The Maldives may be in the frontline state, but even the more developed countries are seeing floods and hurricanes and disasters like no other time before. So this is the time, this is the right issue for us to be able to come together. And I think the UWC is in such a unique position because it brings people at such an interesting young age at a time when we are ready to be inspired, when we're ready to make this change, to take this next step. And I think it is the young people, and because it is the issue of our generation to resolve as well. I'm really interested to hear if any of the other panelists would like to make a comment on any of the things that's been discussed as well. Okay, let me just pose some questions here. I wanted to pick your brain of the panelists here. How do you think one of the issues that we face with the climate crisis is that despite the science being so clear, there are still people who deny the crisis that we face. How do you think we can overcome the collective denial and the lack of individual responsibility? How can individuals make a difference? Because sometimes we feel the climate crisis is so big, as an individual person, there's nothing I can do about it. But I believe the opposite. I think there's something all of us as a person, as an individual, can contribute to this. So how do you think we can personally, individually contribute to resolve this?
Well, I don't know if I'll focus on individually, because it's hard for me to dimension the question in terms of individual thinking or acting. But I do think that with this doomism phenomenon, sometimes we say that humans are the problem on this, right? I mean, we all hear it, like humans are the invasive species that come and destroy the planet. And I think that that's the root of this passive problem, or this being overwhelmed by the problem. Because if humans are the problem, we don't really have much to do about it as humans. But I would argue that us, humans as species, are not the problem itself, but the way in which we have conceived production, economic growth, and organizing our life activities. The world GDP has been increasing for the last decades nonstop, except for the pandemic years. Yet we are still facing hunger, lack of access to education, war, and so many other challenges as humanity. So I think that's what's not encouraging to say, oh, well, why should I fight for this? Because this is hopeless. Well, I think if we don't think, or we start arguing with the fact that it's not humans, but more of how we organize our activities as humans, targeting that will bring, I think, a more active approach from young people as well. And I think that's something we should teach from that point of view when we teach about these issues. As you said, the science is pretty much solved. I mean, there's a lot we're still studying, especially on alternative ways of doing our economic activities. But we know the problem. The thing is how to socially and politically act on it strongly without being disrespectful to what people individually think, but not letting that to compromise our ability to advance on this issue. I think we have to be strong on that, and we have to argue with people on this. And at the individual level, if we hear someone saying something in terms of denying climate change, we have to argue and bring the science on the table and those kind of things.
Thanks, Camila. And this question also did come from the audience in advance. And how can we overcome climate doomism and inspire young people to take action? Maria, how do you respond to this? How to your students especially?
Yeah, Shauna, maybe I'll just combine those last two questions. One about individual collective action, kind of where do we draw the strength from and to overcome or maybe confront this sense of doom and paralysis that sometimes young people feel when they feel small in the face of a massive problem. And I think the individual level of analysis is complicated for me. I think in my experience, it has been the site of virtue signaling and moves to innocence in a deeply flawed system. So, and in fact, I see it as a symptom of like breaking solidarity networks and movements to the point where we feel like we need to act as individuals. So I think from my experience in movements organizing as well as in education, the most powerful thing that anyone can do individually or collectively is to build collective power. Because that's how we're strong, and that's the forces that uphold this system are powerful. And so if we are going to avert anything, it's going to require us to build bridges across power differentials and mobilize broadly to do this. And that is the best perhaps source of hope that I've been able to find. But on your question around doomism, I think there's something to be said about also bearing witness to the grief and showing up to the grief, because that is not pathology that is a normal emotional response to what we are witnessing unfolding in front of us, and just showing up for our young people in this way. If I can share some wise words that are not mine, briefly, they come from Potawatomi ecobotanist and author of Braiding Sweetgrass, and I'll tell you why I want to invite these words into this space, because she talks about our wounded world and says, even a wounded world is feeding us, even a wounded world holds us, and I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. And I think our education system doesn't necessarily orient in this way, but to reorient towards reciprocity and gratitude and relational learning and a sense of responsibility, that we are not entitled to the world, but we've been entrusted with it. And for anyone looking for hope, I would just point you to the work of the All We Can Save project, which is a place from which I draw a sense of hope and optimism.
Barrise, are you still here with us? While we wait, yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I was asking what you think on how we could overcome climate doomism and also inspire young people at a time when it is there's so much anxiety about the climate crisis that we face as well.
Yeah, so to tie it back to the previous question as well about climate denial, when I hear about collective denial, I immediately think of climate change deniers, and then that creates a division of climate change deniers and acceptors. But thinking of this way kind of stares us off course or distract us. So I think this divide prevents constructive engagement by splitting it into an us versus them. And this takes away us from concentrating more on how we can tackle climate change and not if. So working towards overcoming climate doomism, I would say as professionals in the field of climate change and disaster management, sometimes it can get overwhelming to think about all of the things that we could be doing, all of the things that we should be doing, all of the things, the mounting to-do list, the constantly growing to-do list, or approaches to advocacy for climate change, and it can get overwhelming. So I would say to distract you from the anxiety, just keep going or continue to educate yourself. Further education gives you more power and knowledge, so that way you can continue to evolve and adapt your knowledge and figure out more constructive solutions. So you may figure out a problem or acknowledge a problem that you knew was there but didn't really take the time to think about and develop. Also, I would say think about ways to connect with nature. So this whole fight against climate change is for us to protect the environment and to protect the planet. But sometimes we often don't get the time to enjoy the planet that we're trying to fight to protect. So I would say definitely take some time to reconnect with nature, reconnect with your environment, and remember why you're in this fight in the first place, and just keep grounded and move forward to constructive paths.
Barrise, that was really great. Before we conclude, Bill, you have been an inspiration to us all, and that the role that you play, particularly on bridging the generations, I think is so important. I'm really interested to hear your words on how we could continue to work on this together, inspired, but also understanding the urgency of this.
Sure. Look, what a rich discussion this has been. If you ask me, the two most important inventions of the 20th century are going to turn out to have been the solar panel and the nonviolent social movement. And I think that if we make it through, it's going to be because we somehow managed to combine these two things in powerful ways. We need a way for the small and the many to stand up to the mighty and the few. And that's what nonviolent social movements allow us to imagine. And so I think for me, the way to think about individual action is the most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual. and join together with others in movements large enough to make real change possible. And we now have some examples of those that are accessible to almost everyone. There are, parts of Fridays for the Future that are, you can find all over the globe. There's 350.org. There's, and now since you asked about intergenerational stuff, there's this third act work that we're doing with old people, which is actually really fun. It turns out that the relationship between people the age of grandparents and grandchildren is actually really rich and easy, much easier than the relationship between the people of parents, the age of your parents, All grandparents love their grandchildren unconditionally at all times. All grandchildren are smart enough to cut their grandparents some slack, So we're having a huge amount of fun. We just did this big march with the Fridays for the Future chapter here around these banks. And, there were hundreds of high school kids, because there always are. They completely get this. And they were, somewhat more mobile than the rest of us. So they were out in the front of this march. But behind them, there was a big group of us with a banner that said "Fossils Against Fossil Fuels," So that's the kind of, I think, spirit of cooperation and joy and feistiness and a certain amount of anger and a lot of love that it's going to take to try and shake things up enough to actually make a difference here. We don't know that we can do it. We may have waited too late to get started, but we don't know we can't do it either. And so our job in this place and time is to put everything on the line and figure out how to get as much done as we possibly can.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you to all the panelists here for giving your time and also having such a rich discussion on this. I find this far more interesting in the climate negotiations that I usually attend to. Those are the boring ones. But the best time to plant a tree really was yesterday, but the next best time is now for us to do it. We have heard about how rich the UWC experience is in exposing us to an environment, not just in the classes, but even the outdoors. My first week in Canada took me to my first mountain where I saw snow for the first time as well. And that was so different from such an interesting experience for me. That really instilled a huge change of love for nature for me. My experience in Pearson was amazing. And I think that connection to nature is critical in understanding on how we can protect it. I remember in UWC, they used to tell us, you cannot protect until you love it. You can't love it until you know it, and you know it until you meet people through education as well. So that has remained with me since my first year in Pearson 20 years ago. So it is a lifelong education, and young people have to be active participants in this, because we will still be around, we'll still be alive 20, 30 years to come, and we will see the impacts of these, just like how Maldivians are experiencing the impacts of this as well. And tackling the issues at the root cause, going into deeper conversations, not just at basic superficial levels, but understanding how complex institutions are and working together, and how the UN needs to work with the multilateral banks and the private sector. This needs to happen now. And I hope that the UWC experience will be a force in bringing these together as well. But this is just a gist of what I heard. And I know that there's a lot more we discussed today, but we don't have the time that we need to discuss this as much as we want. But this really has brought back those discussions we used to have in theory of knowledge classes and in our village meetings as well. So it's been a great, it's been an honor for me to chair this session. But now I'm going to hand this back to Faith to make a concluding remark. I hope you enjoyed this as well. And I hope that we do this again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, everyone, friends, colleagues, partners. I think from the panelist intervention and from the conversations that we've had today, you would have understood that we are optimists at UWC. And we're not optimists in the sense of a feel-good manner, but we really are thinking about this from a can-do point of view, and that is reflected both in the educational model at UWC as well as the educational practices that we have embedded within our change makers. Maria, you said it very, very well. Actually, we're not just focusing here on the science of climate change. There's a lot more that we can do. There's a lot more that we are already doing and a lot that we must continue to do. As you would have seen from the chart as well, we are joined today by lots of people who want to make the move from climate anxiety and climate fatigue into climate action. And we have sufficient representation from our schools, which are already doing enough exceptional work in this regard, particularly at Pearson College UWC. So shout out to Pearson in the chat and on the screen as well. I think for us, we know that UWC's approach works very, very well. For over 60 years, we have successfully brought together talented young people from the most varied backgrounds across the world into our schools, into our short courses, where we have nurtured their talent, we've built their passion, their skills towards making a tangible, positive impact in the world, and they're now serving as Minister of Education or Environment in the Maldives. So I think these are ways in which we can continue what we have done and build on where we are today. Look, the quest for sustainability is really rooted in UWC's mission. We seek to make education a force to unite people, nations, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. And from this long tradition, we have the knowledge, the expertise, the enthusiastic students, teachers, partners, all of whom contribute deliberately and meaningfully to combating climate change. And for us, the educational innovation, the pilot projects that we can see in the field of sustainability, all of this already being deployed at UWC campuses. You've just seen a tiny bit of that today, and there's a whole lot more that we can do and we want to do. On the UWC website, we have published a brochure that showcases some of the work that has been done across UWC schools and colleges. I'm going to put a link in the chat now for you to have a look at. So just pay attention to that and please have a look, download the brochure and just keep in touch with what we are doing. And as well, you might have picked up from the chart, there's an entire website that is dedicated to showcasing climate initiatives in UWC coming up in just a few short weeks. I haven't really got the permission to share publicly, but I'll go for it. On UWC Day this year, 21st September, that website is going to be public. The entire day is dedicated to sustainability in UWC. So that's just to say this is a moving train. You have to jump on board as quickly as you can. So in order for us to really scale up this important work that we are doing in educating climate leaders, we need your engagement. We need your support in different ways. So I'd like to appeal to you to join us in bolstering this big bang approach to climate change education at the secondary school level. We're looking for people who would support us, partner with us to support or to innovate on our educational systems, to build infrastructure, to fund our classrooms and staff our teaching. We have to fund scholarships for climate-focused champions. We need thought leader partnerships as well with experts in business and finance and academia and government, civil society. Wherever you are, you can be a part of this. So in the chat, we're going to drop a link, already has been dropped actually already, for you to indicate how you might be a part of this next phase of our journey as we carry on our work on climate. I'm looking forward to seeing at least 100 indications of commitment. So please get clicking and tell us how you will be a part of where we are going in the future. So to wrap this up, may I take this moment to express our sincere thanks to our panelists, Bill, Maria, Camila, Barrise, and our fabulous moderator, Shauna. Thank you all so much for today's conversation. And to all of you who have joined us today, thank you for making the time and thank you for your deep engagement. The chart has been popping, and that's exactly how I like to see it. We're looking forward to following up on all of your commitments and working together to transform our schools, our communities, and the world at large. So from all of us, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care, everyone.